Stories are the most powerful thing on earth. They are literally life and death. Wars are waged based on the story of who is the hero and who is the villain. You are the result of a story your parents told each other, the one-night stand, the soulmate, and friends who became so much more. Life and death. So wouldn't you like to understand them better, these stories? How Story Works, an elegant guide to the craft of storytelling by Lonnie Diane Rich, demystifies stories and helps you understand why you love what you love, why you hate what you hate, and why prologues are almost always a bad idea. How Story Works by Lonnie Diane Rich. Available on Amazon in ebook, audiobook, and paperback form. Get your copy today.
Welcome to Still Pretty, a Buffy the Vampire Slayer podcast from Chipperish Media. I'm film scholar and the heart of the Slayer machine, Noelle LaCroix.
And I'm researcher and nerd in pain, Dr. Kelly Jones. We're here today to talk about Storyteller, the 16th episode of Season 7. Storyteller aired on February 25th, 2003. It was written by Jane Espenson and directed by Marita Grabiak.
Still Pretty is a fully spoiled, full-spectrum Buffy podcast, so if you haven't seen all of the show, go take care of that, and we'll completely change our entire story.
You put your old murder weapon in with our utensils?
I washed it.
Oh my god. Let's go on patrol. In Storyteller, we open with Andrew starring in his own version of Masterpiece Theater, regaling us with the tale of Buffy, Slayer of the Vampire.
It's wonderful to get lost in a story, isn't it?
Cut to reality, where Andrew is hiding in the bathroom, narrating his heart out in a handheld camcorder.
For God's sakes, Andrew, you've been in here for 30 minutes. What are you doing?
Entertaining and educating.
Well, why can't you just masturbate like the rest of us?
Andrew attempts to record Buffy in action, following her around the graveyard and the Summers house with his camcorder, documenting the Slayer's story. Buffy tells him to stop filming her, and Anya says what he's doing is pointless. But Andrew believes the Slayer's story should be preserved for future generations. He sways Anya by inviting her to share her unique perspective. And before long, everyone in the Summers house is in favor of capturing the narrative. Willow says it could be educational for the potentials. Xander thinks the world should know about Buffy's heroism, and even Spike gets on board, acting out his bad boy role for the camera.
I thought I told you to piss off with this bloody camera. And here you are again with that thing in my face. Would you sod off before I rip your throat out and eat you?
Spike, the light was kind of behind you.
Oh, right. This better then?
Meanwhile, the Hellmouth seal at the high school is active and up to no damn good, wreaking 7 seasons worth of havoc on students all at once, triggering death and destruction and plenty of fire.
God, I hope that's not a student.
Buffy crafts a plan to make Andrew close the seal and enlists Spike and Principal Wood to help her get Andrew and the knife he used to kill Jonathan to the school basement. While Spike and Wood fight off the possessed students, Buffy plays Andrew in a narrative spin, finally leading him to a true confession and honest tears of empathy and regret. Tears that close the seal.
Because I killed him. Because I listened to Warren and I pretended I thought it was him, but I knew it wasn't. And I killed Jonathan.
Later, back in the bathroom, Andrew records his confession into the camera, but trails off when he tries to explain what and who he is now.
I killed my best friend. There's a big fight coming and I don't know what's gonna happen. I don't even think I'm gonna live through it. I guess I'm...
All right. Dr. Kelly Jones, welcome to Still Pretty. Thank you for filling in for Lonnie this week on this fantastic episode.
I know. Thank you for having me back. I'm so excited because this episode is so good.
Yeah, tell me what you think.
Oh my God, this is one of my favorites. I saw in your notes it's one of your top 5. This is also one of my top 5 Buffy episodes. Tom Link is just beyond delightful as Andrew. Standing round of applause. And Storyteller is so good because it taps into every part of my nerd brain, like reader, writer, researcher, like all of it, because we have storytelling as discovery, as the ultimate vehicle for teaching and learning, as the source of self-actualization, sharing growth, understanding, and meaning. I mean, yes, please. Like, it's just freaking fantastic.
It really, really is. I mean, it is one of my top 5 episodes of Buffy, easily. I have been looking forward to Storyteller all season. I mean, all series, actually. I remembered loving this episode for Andrew's ridiculous charm, like beyond. It's above and beyond. But I am triple delighted by the deep dive into visual storytelling that we get here and how it works and what it all means. Yeah, this episode is so damn good. It's so good.
It's so good. It's so good. And I want to hear your visual storytelling perspective, because this is an area where I don't see what you see. So this is fascinating to me.
Well, what's funny about that is that's a weird thing to try to do on a podcast.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as we were going through this episode and trying to figure out like how to talk about it and what to discuss, I realized I don't know how to talk about what I want to talk about with this episode.
Mm-hmm.
Because here's the thing. Sometimes with episodes of Buffy, you scratch the surface of the meaning and there's not a lot underneath, right? Like, something is meaningful, it's deliberately there in the narrative or in the, in the visual storytelling. But really, they needed to advance a story or a plot point or, develop a character or whatever. There's not a huge amount of depth.
Mm-hmm.
But with Storyteller, I feel like you scratch the surface of the meaning and there's an infinite spiral of meaning all the way down. I mean, just the fact that Anya compares filming yourself to masturbation, that could be a 20-minute conversation. So at the top of the podcast, I feel like I have to acknowledge that, like the genre of Andrew's video, this episode of Still Pretty is going to be all over the place, tonally and genre-wise. I don't know how to talk about how wonderful this episode is, partially because there's so damn much going on here.
Yes. Yeah, it requires a level of appreciation that I sort of don't feel qualified to do, because I want to break down and point out all the ways in which this is brilliant, but it's so brilliant that I can't break it down.
Well, and what's fascinating about that, to me anyway, is what is the point of this episode?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's in a season where so far it feels like there have been so many episodes where I come on the podcast and I'm like, actually, not a lot happens. Like, this is an episode where almost nothing happens. And yet, what is the point of this episode beyond delight? Like, who is this for?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Andrew talks about preserving the story of the Slayer for future generations, right? But in the context of the show, who is this for?
Mm-hmm.
We know what's going on. As an audience, we know because we've been here all along. So Andrew at the whiteboard, Andrew introducing Buffy, Anya, and everyone else, Andrew talking about Dark Willow. I mean, none of this is new information to the viewers.
Mm-hmm.
Very little happens in this episode, and yet the delight is there so powerfully. And it's, I don't know, the delight isn't in what happens or what we learn, but rather in the perspective.
Mm.
And a big part of this episode, to me, like what makes this episode delightful to me, I think, is that it feels like the show being a fan of itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's, I mean, the whole point of view is so fascinating. It's so fascinating. So when we break this down, like from a visual storytelling perspective, right? Andrew is ostensibly talking to a viewer, but in the world of the show, he's talking to himself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he has the camera view screen flipped around, so he's watching himself record himself, long before the days of Snapchat and TikTok. This is selfie culture in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So he's watching himself record himself. He's talking to a viewer, but also to himself. And suddenly we're in a senior level film study seminar because Andrew is speaking to himself in a video mirror, but that mirror is also us, the audience, because we see him make eye contact with the camera.
Wow.
The camera of the show is also often the camera that Andrew is holding or speaking into. So the camera is the camera is the camera. I mean, it's incredible. It's incredible. Who is the audience? Who is the subject? Let's get philosophical.
Oh, we're going to get philosophical.
It's amazing. It's amazing. So it feels is this fan fiction?
Mm.
And it almost feels like the show being a fan of itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fascinating audience insertion kind of a POV. The camera is also the camera is also the camera. I don't know.
Yeah.
Kelly, why is this so good?
I don't know. I just know that it's fantastic. And when you listen to, I don't know, Brandy Carlisle before you write your podcast script notes and you're listening to her sing about the story and you're like, oh, Andrew doesn't have anyone to tell his story to because he killed the only person who cared. Like, oh, and now he has to tell that story to himself. And I love that. But I also love the fact that Buffy can turn anything into a weapon, including the power of story. She's got Andrew like hook, line, and sinker. He thinks he's going to talk to that seal.
Oh, yeah.
And then she's spinning that, what if your blood saves the world? Would you be redeemed then? Like, she is weaponizing his distorted story, but she can turn anything into a weapon. So, like, the Slayer as story, I don't know. It's smarter than I am, but I love it.
It's way smart. Like, it's really, really smart, which is also just such a fun contrast because up to this point, and I think probably even through this episode, part of what makes Andrew delightful is that he's got this kind of bumbling, not so capable, unqualified supervillain thing going on where he is making it up as he goes along. I mean, quite literally a lot of the time. He, in the course of a single conversation, will ping pong from I'm good now to no, I'm super, super evil and I'm doing evil, dark things. Like he really is just making it up as he goes along without a lot of thought and without a lot of planning.
Mm-hmm.
And yet his episode is one of the smartest episodes, I think, of the entire series.
Oh, yeah. Agreed.
And something that I noticed right away, I mean, partially because we always say who wrote and directed the episode each week. Like, isn't it interesting that we have a female writer and a female director on this episode that is such an oddball episode. I mean, it's an episode that is literally about an outsider's perspective. I mean, it's an atypical approach to telling this story that we already know. And it feels like maybe not a coincidence that narrative comes from two women.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you want a brilliant, emotionally resonant, fantastic, thought-provoking episode, give the script and the camera to women. I mean, like, it shut and sealed case. Like,
I mean, honestly, like, we've tried the male auteur thing. Like, we've tried it. Like, let's give women the director's chair for a while, please, and like see what happens.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating that this episode. Okay, so this atypical episode also references not just multiple styles and modes of visual storytelling, but also multiple reasons for storytelling, which, I don't know, that feels like a very... I don't want to gender something unnecessarily, but that feels like a very different perspective in the world of film and television.
Yeah.
That something could exist, that a piece of visual storytelling could exist for more than one reason. I mean, that we could shift, I don't know, that we can shift genre and format within a single episode and it still feels cohesive because we're coming at it from this unique perspective of somebody who is viewing all of this as an outsider. I don't know that I'm making any sense here.
No, it makes total sense to me. And kind of back to the who is this for, right? We have Andrew telling us things that we already know. This is the Slayer. This is the Hellmouth. You know, these are the Bringers. We don't know much about them. Dawn used to be a key. I don't know what that means.
I don't know what that means.
It's one of my favorite bits. But it is delightful to watch his explanation of the story that we already know. And I think that is about perspective. And just hearing someone else, I mean, it's the whole idea behind writing or expressing yourself in any way, right? Because every story has already been told. Like every plot point has already been done to some extent, but not by you. And it is that unique perspective. It is that unique voice that causes others to stop and think. When you can literally look at something from someone else's perspective, your perspective expands. And then when you have that being done by someone as charming, as ridiculously charming, this character who I should hate and despise, and I'm like cheering the entire episode, that is just some next level magic.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that for me has been the magic of Andrew all along.
Yeah.
And I've talked about this before on this podcast that I should despise him. I really should. He is despicable in many, many ways. And yet, I love him and I am rooting for him so hard. And not just in this episode. I mean, in this episode, he is being charming in the sense that he is trying to charm an audience.
Right.
Which is, you know, that's a whole thing to unpack. But I love him. Why do I love him so much? Is it that he's just making it up as he's going along? Like, is that, does he just tap into that kind of, yeah, I don't know what's going on either, Andrew? Like, and he does it, okay, and he does it in the name of connection, right? Like, even his confession at the end, which is so poignant, he confesses not just to having killed his best friend, but also that he knew that it wasn't Warren. But he deliberately ignored that knowledge because he wanted that relationship. That's some powerful stuff too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you have Andrew basically floating down the lazy river of narrative, going wherever the story takes him, right? With no direction. But he is also in it. So like when he's acting out his supervillain self, like he's
Oh my God.
100% bought in, you know?
Yeah.
When he's acting out the different stories about why he killed Jonathan, he is fully in. And you see him go this like willing participant, right, in the flow of narrative. Like, I will go where that story takes me, and I will buy in to, I have literally just hit an anchor, and now I am anchored, and the stories are passing over me, but I know where I am. I know what's real. And like, that is a very powerful human experience that I think we've all gone through in one form or fashion. Like, hopefully not stabbing our best friend over a seal of a hellmouth, but to some extent, we have all had to wrestle with, this was the story I was telling myself. This is what is actually true. And I think that this episode embodies that in such a beautiful way that we all can connect to it in some form or fashion.
Well, and what's interesting is that, so the episode is called Storyteller. And, ostensibly that's Andrew. But I think one of the most powerful messages about storytelling comes from Buffy. So the high school is losing its entire mind. And the way Buffy explains that to Principal Wood is the way a thing feels, it kind of starts being that way for real.
Yeah.
Which is very much about storytelling. Like the stories... The story I'm making up? Dr. Brene fucking Brown again
right.
with the, like just laying the truth on all of us. But if I decide that this is the role that I'm going to play, consciously or unconsciously, I will start behaving in that way. If I feel a certain way about my circumstances, that starts to become true. So this, I don't know, there's something to be said here about the intersection of story and feeling and facts. And this idea that, I think we've all heard it in self-help spaces, in therapy, like feelings are not facts.
Right.
But they also kind of are, because they're the only information we have about what's going on around us. They're how we make sense of life. Buffy says life is not a story, but it kind of is.
Yeah.
There's so much in this that it's just wild. It's wild to me how insightful this is.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's freaking brilliant. And you have a section in here that calls on one of my favorite quotes from Andrew. So I'm going to let you run with that. But the whole idea of what are you doing? Entertaining and educating. Like, yes. I can't even begin to say how much that delights me. And it's presented as a joke, but those two things are so deeply connected because you can't educate someone without holding their attention. And, and so, I'm not a edutainment fan. Like, I do believe in deep thought and very difficult academic work, but the emotional hook into any cognitive space is real. Yeah. And I love how that is so honestly and yet lightheartedly hit over the head in this episode. And it just freaking delights me.
Yeah. Yeah. Why is Andrew doing any of this?
Yeah.
And Anya's the one who confronts him. And the way he says entertaining and educating, he does not say it with confidence. He says it with this, like, I am standing up for myself for the first time in my life kind of energy. And I don't know why that's so delightful that he's carving out his place in all of this. He's I love him. I didn't talk about it last time, but Buffy says that he's the hostage and he rechristens himself the guestage.
Yes.
Which
so good.
Why is that so good? Why? Because he wants to be part of this entire thing. He wants to be part of everything that's going on. And he's like, well, what do I have to offer? Narrative. Like, he's going to use that to create something, to carve out this place for himself. So he says, he's explaining what he's doing. And he describes it as, a valuable record, an important document for the ages, a slayer in action. The story needs to be told. The world's going to want to know about Buffy. It's a legacy for future generations. Just building himself up and building himself up. But he's not wrong.
Right.
He's really not wrong. And what I find so lovely is that Buffy thinks filming is idiotic. But everyone else has excellent reasons for why the tapes matter, why these videotapes are important. Willow cites education and training, right? She says it's good for the potentials to watch the tapes.
Yeah.
Amanda and Xander talk about proof of Buffy saving the world. Rona says it would be nice to have a record, which I love. That one kind of slides under the radar a little bit, but the idea that, like, yeah, it would just be nice to have a record of this. Like, how many times, oh my gosh, how many times have I looked at some historical event or even something in, my own life or my family history and thought, oh God, it would be so great just to have a record of that.
Yeah.
Without ascribing any meaning to it necessarily, just like, what was going on? I don't know. And then Anya mentions future generations. Spike, I love Spike's reason. Spike says it's good for keeping Andrew busy, which honestly, also a valid reason. Giving Andrew a project, I think, is really valuable. But Buffy is the only one who's like, no, this is a waste of time.
Yeah.
And I mean, and she's ostensibly the subject of all of this, which is something that as I say it now, I'm like, oh, there's a whole other dynamic about who gets to say that your story matters.
Right. Right. Well, and it's fascinating to me. And in a minute, we're going to get deep into some qualitative research methodology because I can't help myself.
We are.
But I love this Buffy versus Andrew, and eventually Andrew and everyone else, right, about this idea of capturing this narrative. And so first of all, from a qualitative research perspective, Andrew is violating Rule 1. No one should be the subject. They should be a participant. And Buffy is being put in the role of subject that she did not ask for and does not want. So this is a very, you're telling someone's story who doesn't want their story captured and told, right? And I think that Andrew needs that as a reason to tell his own story. Like, Buffy is the vehicle through which he is going to get to his confession. But it has to be this big, elaborate, I am making this movie. I am capturing this. I am heroizing the Slayer, this kind of thing. And then I think it also speaks to that call for creative expression that so many of us feel. Like, I have had a thing for photography since I was a toddler. I don't know why. I need to take pictures of stuff. I don't know why. I'm not going to publish them. I don't even know what I do with them, but I need to photograph things that happen. I need to write stuff down. And I always have. I don't know where that comes from. I don't know what it means, but I think a lot of people feel that, and Andrew, just to me, I'm like, yeah, I get it, baby. I know. I'm the same way. Like, I would be photographing all of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm going to jump ahead in my notes because I have this quote from the 2002 film 1 Hour Photo, which is it's not a well-known film, but it stars Robin Williams in a really, really powerful role as a man named Chipperish, who is a developer at a 1 hour photo place back when that was a thing. But like just like all the dated technology today. And at one point, Cy is talking about still photographs and photo albums. And he says, if these pictures have anything important to say to future generations, it's this. I was here. I existed. I was young. I was happy. And someone cared enough about me in this world to take my picture.
Oh, wow.
And I think that there's something about why take pictures? Why take video? It boils down to, I care. Someone cared enough about me in this world to take my picture. Andrew films because he cares so deeply about all of this. I mean, you point a camera at something because you want to capture it. You want to remember this, but also it matters to you.
Right.
You don't photograph things that don't matter to you.
Right.
Which, zooming way the fuck back out, right, is a little commentary, I think, on the writer-director television relationship as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, where we focus our stories, what a writer writes about, what a director, how a director brings that script to the screen.
Yeah.
I mean, someone cared enough about me in this world to take my picture.
Oh, God. That's just beautiful.
And what's fascinating about that and Andrew as a character, and I think part of the reason that I love him so much is that he does care very deeply. Like when he is fictionalizing something,
right,
which he does so beautifully in this episode. Oh my goodness. When he's fictionalizing, he's all in. Like he's fully playing the role. But part of the reason for that is that he cares so much. This is all deeply meaningful to him. This is all very important to him. And he is so invested in relationship. Like throughout this episode in particular, he's really, really focused on relationships and how those work, but because he's making it, I think, ultimately for himself and to work on his relationship with himself, what he notices and how he relates to other people's relationships is highly specific. So I'm thinking mostly about Xander and Anya, right? And when he starts filming them and suddenly he's kind of in journalist mode.
Yeah.
But not really, because his whole affect is very couples therapist. He's couples therapist with a camcorder. But then when he's playing that back, when he's playing back video of Xander and Anya, he's playing the Anya role in that interaction, which, when you consider that we go on to see Xander and Anya in bed together later on, and also in not exactly flashback, in story told imagination flashback-ish. How do you even talk about this episode? I don't know. When we're in Andrew's head with him as he's telling the story of himself and Jonathan in Mexico, we see them in bed together. And you said it earlier, Andrew has no one to tell his story to because the person who mattered most in his life, he killed.
Yeah.
So there's almost I don't know. There's an overlay of this, of the Andrew Jonathan relationship on to the Xander-Anya relationship. Visually, thematically, like they get a chance, Xander and Anya get a chance to kind of wrap up their story.
Mm-hmm.
They conclude their story, but Andrew and Jonathan will never get to do that because Andrew killed Jonathan.
Yeah.
And then has to tell that story. I mean, he confesses to Buffy, but he's really confessing to himself. And then at the end, he has no one to tell his story to but himself.
Yeah.
It's so complex.
It is. It's just amazing. And I kind of love Buffy being the conduit to this confession, because for her, she needs it. Like, this is a practical problem the Slayer needs to solve. We got to close this seal.
Right.
Which means I got to make Andrew cry, like real authentic tears or whatever. And I love this kind of comparison when we look at the role of Buffy. And if you look like concurrently of what's going on in Angel, where Angel in his new kind of independent role is about saving one soul at a time. Mm-hmm. Buffy is not worried about Andrew's soul. Buffy has to move beyond the relationship dynamic, right? She loves her people, but she has this crystal clear vision of hundreds of these primordial vampires underneath this seal waiting to come out and kill everyone. So she is in a fight for humanity, and she has to separate herself and kind of step far away from this very intimate self-exploration and relationship space where Andrew is very stunted, right? So she has to push him through this emotional truth, but she has a practical reason for doing it. It has nothing to do with helping Andrew, which I just think is fascinating. And sometimes I have a little bit of trouble connecting to Buffy in season 7, but to me, this is Buffy as the boss. Like, because she is so driven by this vision, she has no time or patience for story. And you see her kind of move in the way that she's manipulating Andrew here. First, she gets his hopes up. You know, she's playing on his ego. We need you to come talk to the seal. You understand this language, you know. And then she gets into this snarky kind of confrontation. You know, she says, you stabbed Jonathan to death. What were you trying to do? Scratch his back from the front? And then as, you know, she's holding him at knife point and she intimidates him. Yeah. This thing doesn't understand words. It understands blood. And then she makes a demand. Stop telling stories. Life isn't a story. And then she dips once again, as only Buffy can, into self-criticism. I'm making this all up. What kind of hero does that make me? Good people are going to die. Girls, maybe me, probably you, which I love. I love the probably you. But yes. She is saying, like, you are trying to capture me as a hero, and that is not the role that I am playing right now. And if I have to stab you in this moment, I might do it. You know, and Andrew even asks, what if the tears didn't work? And Buffy walks away without answering. And I love that moment. But what is so great to me here is the fact that Buffy is so anti-story, right? She thinks this is dumb. She doesn't want it captured. She doesn't want to participate. And Robin Wood, who I freaking adore, is the one who calls Buffy out. So he's talking about her and her friends, and he says, I don't know why any of you should trust each other. You've all been evil at some point, right? And Buffy says, well, not me. And I'm like, remember that time you took your sister and all your friends down to the basement and like tied them up and tried to kill them? But like that story, her story is, I have never been evil. And she doesn't even realize that she's doing some of the same kind of narrativization that Andrew is doing.
Yeah.
And I just, oh my God, it is so fascinating to me to see her carrying such an impossible weight and resisting so hard. The very reason that she's carrying that weight, which is humanity, which is about the stories that we tell ourselves and others. Like, this is just so good.
Yeah. Well, and just the insistence that there is no time for story because there's no time for emotion,
Yes.
which is what we got from her last week. But it's still all emotional. Like underneath it, it's still like she's very much in this like boss mode. I mean, I think you nailed it. She's in like business space almost. Like it's not, like if I have to stab Andrew over the seal, it's not personal, it's business.
Exactly.
And it's certainly not to help him.
Yep.
She's not trying to get him to, have this emotional, empathetic realization. She's not trying to heal his wounded relationship with Jonathan and himself by making him feel what Jonathan felt. She's literally like, we have to close this seal.
Yeah.
And if I have to kill Andrew, I absolutely will. But that is still all narrative. It's still part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it so much. But then, of course, like I have to get full on nerd, qualitative research philosopher geeky because, oh my God.
Well, and this is why when we need someone to fill in on Still Pretty, it's you. Because while I'm like, the visual storytelling, like as we bring Anya into the narrative, we zoom in on her. So she's literally brought into the narrative. I'm doing that. You're like, okay, but philosophy.
No, but I love how you do that because you're right. Like, and I don't see that part. But what I did see was in the opening Masterpiece Theater sequence, which is one of my favorite things that has ever been on television ever. Like this Andrew in Masterpiece Theater.
God, it's so good. And just like, I have to stop you before you even start and just like shout out to production design.
Yes.
Like the beautiful melding of Andrew's Andrewness with this highly recognizable, like even if you've never seen Masterpiece Theater, like what they're doing here. It's so good. It's so good.
It's so good. Down to the fact that he chokes on a pipe in his own imagination.
Okay. Why is that so perfect? Is it like, okay, because when he's a supervillain, like when he's rewriting, like, I was a supervillain, he's central in the frame in his like monochromatic black suit, tie. Jonathan and Warren are his sidekicks, like dressed in, they're dressed in like civvies and he's wearing a suit. And he's so suave and so perfect. What is it? In my plan, we are beltless. Like it's so good. So brilliant. He's so cool in his own imagination. But in this Masterpiece Theater opening bit, he chokes on the pipe and then gestures so awkwardly in his own imagination.
Yeah. It's so
genius.
Good. It's so good. So, but in this opening shot, right, we move from a bookshelf to a table to the chair. And on that bookshelf, we zoom in on Nietzsche. And I'm like, okay, pause. So we move from Nietzsche to an open comic book. And I'm like, all right, pause again. So, Nietzsche was a German philosopher who greatly influenced modern Western intellectual thought. And his work and his life story have been weaponized. His sister essentially gave his theories to the Nazis. Nietzsche died very young, and his sister was sympathetic to the Nazi party. And she repurposed a lot of his work. That was not his intent. So it was badly weaponized and misrepresented. But he has still had an amazingly strong influence on modern thinking and modern visual storytelling. See The Matrix and Arrival for examples. But
two of your faves,
I
no
know,
big deal.
Like this is no coincidence, right? But Nietzsche philosophized about the death of God, theorizing that people could create a narrative of life centered around people instead of centered around God. And he basically encouraged a literary examination of the human experience. He believed that each of us must craft our own understanding of ourselves and the world through self-realization. Like, that was his pitch. Understand yourself in the world by understanding your story. So the fact that they opened this episode with a shot of Nietzsche's book, I was like, oh my God, like, well done. Just all the applause. Like, oh, please, yes. And the quote that I pulled, this is from Nietzsche's book, Human, All Too Human. He said, however far man extend himself with his knowledge, however objective he may appear to himself, ultimately he reaps nothing but his own biography. And I'm like, yes, that is what this episode is about. Because in Storyteller, right, we are watching Andrew process his way from fiction to the truth about himself.
Mm-hmm.
If Maslow had a hierarchy of story, we are watching Andrew climb it like a jungle gym. Like, it's so good, right? So he's starting out as a documentarian or a reporter in the house in the graveyard, right?
Yeah.
The story needs to be told. I document. I don't participate. And the fact that he walks out of the kitchen right when Buffy starts explaining very dangerous and important things is so goddamn funny.
It's so perfect. It's so perfect. It's so perfect for him. It's so perfect for the show.
Yeah.
It's the show being a critical fan of itself for a minute.
It's so good. And then we see him as a teacher historian at the whiteboard explaining, everything. And then he says, due to some circumstances, the seal got opened up a little bit recently. So you have the academic third person POV, mistakes were made.
Yup.
And no connection to himself at all.
Yep.
I'm like, that is just chef kiss flawless, right?
Yes.
So good.
Yes. And what's genius is that he's realizing in the moment, like he's doing it live. Like he didn't plan to, I don't think he planned to write himself out of that story until he got to that part and realized, oh, I can't really explain this without I can't explain this without implicating myself. So I have to live on the fly.
Yeah.
Erase myself from the, it's so brilliant.
It's so good. And then we see him shifting into director mode when Spike is acting out the bad boy evil vamp, which is just delightful beyond words. And Andrew's like, Spike, the light was behind you. And Spike repositions and does it again. So we have Andrew as director.
Yep.
Then we have him as like Barbara Walters interview counselor. Xander, how do you feel about leaving Anya at the altar? And then we've got the human interest piece. Dawn is the sweet face, and here's the relationships and the romance, and then him rewatching and quoting Anya and Xander, and him imagining sexual tension between Wood and Spike when Wood actually wants to kill Spike, and missing the sexual tension between Buffy and Spike is also so good.
And deliberately sidestepping Willow and Kennedy after setting up that relationship to fanboy over Xander's construction skills. Although that is the one moment in this episode that I'm like, nope, I nope out. There is no way that they would not hear him talking and stop making out. That would not. Anyway.
I don't know. If you're deep enough into the making out, you might not hear the
but
outside
that
world.
making out is not.
Yeah, I know.
No.
I did like, though, that the point of that shot was not objectifying the lesbians kissing. Like, that was actually kind of fun. But I do think they would have heard him. So then he shifts into this dramatization, right? Flat out liar, turning his past into mythology. I was once a supervillain, but the rewriting of his encounter with Dark Willow is amazing with that original footage and Willow's real dialogue.
It's genius. I mean, and when I say that this is about fan fiction, that's part of it.
Mm-hmm.
The way that when we write fan fiction, we are participating in something that has already been made and shaping that into a narrative that we want to see. The reason he rewrites that is that's how he wants that to go.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. And using the footage, I mean, great move, just, from a budgetary perspective.
Yeah.
But it makes it points up exactly what he's doing there in the way that he is shaping the story around how he wishes things had gone. Because I don't think he really sees himself that way. He's not fooling anybody, really. I don't know.
He has a very strong aspirational self. Like, I will give him that.
Yes.
And then we see him shift from that flat out fiction writer space into participant observer, but dude, you're doing it wrong. So he is a participant observer. Like, he participated in the killing of Jonathan, but he is trying to now reframe that as an outside observer, where at first, Jonathan was possessed and I had to kill him in self-defense, to, oh no, I was possessed, so this is not my fault, right? So he's trying now to rationalize like what happened. And then finally, when he is held at knife point, he becomes a truth teller. Then he gets into memoir. I knew this wasn't Warren, but I wanted it to be. And it's the moment when that shifts into, this is what Jonathan felt, that those tears, so not just regret, not just self-actualization, but empathy is what closes the seal down. And oh my God, like, I can't even. And then it just gets better, right? Because we could have ended there and I would have been satisfied. But no, because Jane Epsonson is brilliant. We move from memoir to autoethnography. And like, I just have to pause for a second and say, oh my God, like, just so good. So in qualitative research, autoethnography is the methodology of examining culture, right? Or some kind of cultural phenomenon, which is the graphy, through your own life story, which is the auto. So autoethnography is memoir and meaning in a larger context. What does it mean to live these particular experiences in this particular culture at this particular time? So you try to make sense of the world by examining your experience in the world. And Andrew is now crossing into that space. He's not ready to do it, but he's ready to begin. Because the very last thing we get is him back in that bathroom recording himself again. And he says, I killed my best friend. And then he says, I guess I'm, and it cuts to black. Yeah. So he has the truth. He doesn't yet have the meaning of that truth. So we see him on the edge of beginning autoethnographic work. And I can't, like, I love this so much. And then later, like, knowing what we see of him in future seasons of Angel, you see Andrew so grown, so evolved, a protector of the Slayers, that you're just like, oh God, well done. Just well done, everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God. So good. There's so much in that. I want to circle back to empathy mattering more than the confession.
Yeah.
And first of all, hell yes. And I think that that is literally what will save the world, right? If we can imagine how this might feel to someone else. I think I think that we would make a lot of progress. Just, how would this feel to another person? How did this feel to another person? That's one thing. But also, isn't that the point of story? Like, all of this, right? Isn't that the point of why do we film what we film? Why do we write what we write? Empathy? Empathy is the most important piece of story and storytelling.
So. Yeah.
I mean, I was asking at the beginning of the podcast, like, what is the point of this episode, in a way? I mean, other than it is specifically to delight me. The point is empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Empathy literally saves the world.
Yeah.
I don't know. I
mean,
no big
for
deal.
real, it does. And I had a section, I was like, some of this stuff is just too delightful. So I made a delight in deep questions that are not actually deep questions. They're just, I love this episode and I don't know how to categorize these things.
Oh, yeah.
But when they're in the basement with Buffy and Principal Wood and that little pig runs by and Robin says, God, I hope that's not a student. Like, I bust out laughing every single time. It is so good.
Well, and he has so many good lines.
He does.
He has his line about Spike's wondering about the weapons and where they came from. He's like, wood shop, I guess. It's nice to know they're paying attention in class.
I know. I love that bit. And Robin was totally going to stake Spike with that weapon.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And was interrupted by, a possessed teenager, as happens to all of us. And I'm like, okay. I mean, I get this, right? This episode is brilliant. The seal can control people with all its evil power. But have you ever tried to get a group of high school students to work together in unison and in silence? Because I'm not sure there's any force strong enough to actually pull that off. Like, that's my one going, I believe you can destroy the world, but I don't know that you can get a group project off the ground that seamlessly with teenagers.
I mean, the way that a group project works in high school is that one person does it all and then everyone else takes credit. So
exactly. But oh God, it makes me laugh. And then I was with Andrew, like, why do vampires show up on video?
What I love is that is never acknowledged, is never addressed. I love that the question is asked, but then we just leave it. And I think it's because we're being self-aware with this episode. Like, things show up on video. The real answer is things show up on video because we point the video camera at them and say they matter. Right? Taking us back to, we videotape and film and photograph the things that are important to us.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, through that sort of magic, through the circular logic of magic, they have to show up on video because they are important. I think that's why. But yeah, like, why do they show up on video?
Why do they show up on video? There is a mirror in that camcorder. I don't know. It's just, it's so good. It's so good. So, Noelle, what is your favorite part?
Oh my God. I mean, I think maybe the concept of this episode is my favorite part. I don't know if that can be a favorite part.
Of course it can.
That might be my favorite part. I mean, I love the whole sequence of Andrew in the basement as writer/director/star. Andrew zooming in on himself and his whiteboard. What I love about this is that while we open with this beautiful Masterpiece Theater set and lighting, Andrew's reality is that he's an awkward kid in a basement with terrible lighting and cleaning supplies behind him and echoey audio. I freaking love In My Plan, We Are Beltless. Like, for so many reasons. It's such a ridiculous line. It's delivered so masterfully. And it's one of those bits that always delights me from a writer-director standpoint of, on the page, that's not really anything. Like, it's funny, but the delivery and the way the camera, like, pushes in on him with so much gravitas, like, that just makes it. But that moment when Andrew is noticing Willow and Kennedy, he's left the kitchen just as Buffy has started her big speech/explanation. And then he's like, oh, even Willow looks bored. And then Kennedy comes over and he's like, oh, this is important. And he goes into more narrative about them than we have gotten up until this point, which I also kind of enjoy. That the entire Willow Kennedy story really comes through Andrew. But his little excitement over noticing something tiny, his this is meaningful. Look at this tiny little gesture, and it speaks to this entire history. I'm like, listen, just call me out next time. Like, that is literally what I do. Viewing everything that I ever view. Like, look at this. No, this tiny little gesture, this tiny little movement. It means this grand thing in the sweeping narrative that is no, like, calm down. Like, you're bringing so much importance to this tiny little thing. But that might be my favorite part, because that is who I am, hanging out in the hallway, just like noticing tiny little gestures and geeking out about them. I don't know. What about you? What's your favorite part?
Oh, God, that opening sequence. Andrew in his smoking jacket, fully living Masterpiece Theater, and then choking on his pipe. It is just sheer perfection. And when he's lecturing about the seal, due to some circumstances, it got opened up a little bit recently. Like,
a little bit.
It's still a little bit, but the power of passive voice and why we use it.
Oh, yeah.
It's just it's so good. This whole episode is just freaking delightful. So I am so glad I got to guest with you on this one, because it's fantastic. If you enjoyed this conversation and would like to join in, follow @Chipperish on Twitter and use the hashtag StillPretty. Or as a Patreon supporter at any level, you can join the Chipperish Discord group and chat live with other listeners and the hosts.
Did you know Patreon supporters who chip in at $10 and up get to attend show recordings live? And we've got a stretch goal. Very soon, we're going to unlock the monthly Chip Chat, where Lonnie will host a private 1-hour monthly Zoom call open to every supporter to talk about whatever, no matter what amount you pledge. So if you haven't pledged your support yet, now's the time.
Speaking of supporters, this episode of Still Pretty was brought to you by the Chipperish Media producers who support us on Patreon at the power producer level. These people are the reason why Still Pretty is coming to you free and ad-free right now. So thank you to Abby, Alice, Christina, Erica, Jonathan, Kevin, Kristen, Michael, Rose, Sarah, Shelley, Stephania, and Stephanie. And this week's special message for our power producers: you've all been evil at some point, right?
While you're waiting for the next episode of Still Pretty, here are some things you can do. Write a great review on Apple Podcasts, tell your friends about the show, or win yourself a free vacation to the beautiful downtown Hellmouth. Lonnie and I will be back next time with Lies My Parents Told Me, the 17th episode of Season 7. Until then, it's wonderful to get lost in a story, isn't it?